Welcome to Inside the Polygraph. I'm your host, David Goldberg, expert polygraph examiner. Join me as I and my guests break down the facts, fictions of polygraph testing, law enforcement, and so much more. Real cases, real conversations. The truth is always revealed inside the polygraph. Welcome to Inside the Polygraph. I'm your host, David Goldberg. On today's show, I have a very special guest. This guest is a retired homicide detective who has solved over 100 real-life serious violent crimes that include homicides, deaths, and cold cases. This special guest been from the second most populous city in Maricopa County, Arizona. And in 2019, this special guest received the Homicide Investigator of the Year Award from the Arizona Homicide Association. He also was a uniformed Secret Service officer and is a very successful published author. On today's show, we are going to delve deep into his experience as a homicide detective, into his successful published book, and in a serious headline that everyone has witnessed in Arizona because that's where he is from. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome our special guest, Justin Bocock. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you very much, David. I appreciate it.
Now, as you can tell, I gave a very brief, very small of your bio, and my listeners want to listen and hear about you from you. So go ahead, and the floor is all yours.
Okay, I just want to introduce myself. So I am a retired detective from Mesa, Arizona. I never really thought I was going to get into law enforcement. I actually ended up going the opposite route that most people do. Most people will go local law enforcement and then go to federal law enforcement. I kind of went the opposite way. I got involved in law enforcement. I just stumbled across it. I was in the United States Air Force as an aircraft mechanic, and I fixed large airplanes, C-141Bs. And part of our job was we transported the presidential limos. Well, when I was getting ready to get out of the military after my 4 years of service, it was right towards the end of it. I ended up talking to Secret Service people who said, "Hey, you should apply for the uniform division of the Secret Service." Didn't know what they were. So I went through the process. It was a lengthy process, involved pretty big background investigation, polygraphs, the whole works. I ended up getting the position. In the Secret Service Uniform Division, we were responsible for basically the locations and the perimeters of the locations where protectees would be in, whereas agents are responsible for the actual protectee themselves. So I was assigned, after completing all the training, I was assigned to the Naval Observatory, which is the official residence of the Vice President. That was under Vice President Al Gore at the time. After about a year and a half there, greatest training in the world, it was just really boring. And I don't do sitting really well. I kind of had an itch to maybe do a little bit more because I got a taste of law enforcement because we were actual certified federal officers. So I had federal powers, could make arrests and all that. But a majority of what I did was protection. Very, very important. But I kind of had a little itch to maybe do some investigation. So one day a friend of mine at the White House said, "Hey, there's a guy from the Mesa Police Department in Mesa, Arizona that says that Mesa's hiring and they're an upcoming agency." I'm originally from Tucson, Arizona, which is about an hour and a half away from Mesa. I kind of did some research on them, and Mesa at the time, this was about 2000, 2001, they were growing very, very much. And they were hiring a lot of people and getting a lot more innovative in their policing. They were hiring a lot more detectives, hiring officers. So I basically applied, I got hired, and I ended up resigning from the Secret Service and going to the Mesa Police Department. I hired in there, graduated the academy in August of 2001, right before I was in training, like my final training during 9/11 as a police officer. So kind of from there, it just kind of went because we all remember from 9/11 on, more emphasis started coming on to actual law enforcement. And so with Mesa PD, I did 6 years as a patrol officer. 3 of those were a field training officer. So I trained new officers in being a uniform division officer. So basically a patrol officer. In 2007, I tested into the detective corps and I made it. I always joke that when you go to detectives in Mesa, you have to start out at the bottom. And my first assignment was I was the nighttime beer run detective. And that's what I solved I solved beer runs. And I kind of worked my way up. One night there was a shooting and I was the only detective on duty. The individual who got shot didn't die, so the homicide unit didn't come out. So they basically were like, "It's yours." And that's when I got my first taste of violent crimes, and I loved it. And that's when I said, "You know what? Violent crimes is my thing. This is what I want to do." I really enjoyed tracking down everything. Back then it was video. After about a week, I tracked the suspect down, got him arrested, interviewed, denied, denied, denied. I just kind of kept throwing some evidence at him, showing him video surveillance, and he confessed to the whole thing. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I solved a shooting." From there, I went to robbery and kind of violent crimes as in shootings and robberies, non-death. And I just really enjoyed robberies and violent crimes. I enjoyed working those types of cases. I enjoyed the stress and the involvement in it, the where it was constantly you're sitting at your desk 1 minute and then you get a phone call and next thing you know you're out there running around trying to track down people. In 2012, I tested into the homicide unit in Mesa Police Department. Ended up doing 8 years in the homicide unit, where it was the pinnacle of investigations. Where now you kind of took everything I learned from patrol officer on the street to my beer run times to my robbery and aggravated assault times, all the way up to now solving homicides. And after 20 years, I retired, but I always knew I was going to leave after 20 years because I could get my pension and I could move on because I always said there was other jobs I wanted to do. So I'm a young man and technically retired, but I'm not. I am a retired detective. I'm just not doing anything. But I always knew I wanted to do other things. I really enjoyed teaching while I was in the Mesa Police Department, and that's what led me to after retiring in 2021, after 20 years with the Mesa Police Department. I was a subject matter expert contributor to two textbooks that are actually used in college level classes right now. I did the PowerPoints for them, and I also provided test questions and also scenario questions, providing my real life experience on being a police officer and a detective to kind of mix with the academic world to give students, college students, a better understanding of what it's like to be a police officer when they're in college type classes. And then last year, I spent about 2 years writing a book called On Call: Case Files from a Career in Homicide, and it's basically it's a case study of 13 homicides that I worked when I was in homicide and how
Don't
we.
talk about all of it. All of it. We're going to save that to the last. Okay.
Okay,
We're going
yeah,
we're
so
going
then
to
that's
save
what
that.
led me to this. There we go.
We're going to save
So
that
that's
for the very, very last. So let's do a little teaser there. Okay. You just gave a little teaser to the listeners, but we're going to save that book part to the very last for the
okay.
listeners. But I'm happy that you wrote one because I want the listeners to listen all the way to the end because we have something special for them.
Cool.
Go ahead. I didn't mean to
Well, no, so
interrupt.
and then that's it. That leads me up to present day.
I just want you to, expand on that book. I'm going to let you expand on that book at the very end.
Yep. So that leads me up to where I am today.
All right. Well, that is an amazing bio. And I have a lot of listeners in reference to wanting to become in law enforcement and wanting to be in the federal process like you were, in how to become a Secret Service officer or even in the uniform division. I get phone calls, as well as being a firefighter, being EMS. And when I give them the advice, I tell them that it's not an easy process and it's a long, long one. You elaborated on it a little bit, but if you could tell the listeners in reference to your process when you were applying from the very beginning on the Secret Service, and as well as when you applied with the Mesa Police Department, what you had to go through in order to get hired, because TV shows, they don't show the lengthy process. And if you'll just elaborate on that so that the listeners go, oh, wow, it is a long process.
It was a long process, especially for the Secret Service uniform division. I started out with just filling out a paper application. This was 1998, so we still did paper applications. Mailed that in. I was invited to take a test. At the time, I was stationed at McGuire Air Force Base, New Jersey, which is kind of just outside of Philadelphia, but in New Jersey. So my testing location was Hershey, Pennsylvania. I drove to Hershey, Pennsylvania, and took a test. What amazed me was we go into the test. First off, you stand in this long line, and it was like an auditorium. And I go into the test, and we sit down, and it's every other chair is filled. And they basically say, "Look around," and we look. You're kind of looking around, and they say, "Out of everybody in this room, one of you might get selected.
Wow.
And I'm an aircraft mechanic at the time in the United States Air Force, right? And then next to me was a Virginia State Trooper, and on the other side was a New Jersey State Trooper. And I'm thinking, you know, I'm going to do it just because, I mean, who's ever said that they could test it for the Secret Service? You know what I mean? I'm going to give it a shot.
Right.
So I take the test, I go outside, I hand them the test, they grade it, and they go stand in that line. The line that I was in, that was just the beginning of the line. There was whole other lines on the outside. From my understanding, there was about 12 to 1,500 people who tested for that position at that time.
Wow.
So I took
Wow.
the test, and that was about 6 months before I got out of the military. Got out of the military, didn't hear anything from them. And they always say, don't call us, we'll call you. So I actually moved to Seattle, Washington, where I was fixing airplanes for BF Goodrich. I was doing heavy maintenance on United 727-200s. So I moved out there and always kind of had in the back of my mind, like, well, I got the Secret Service thing going. We'll see what happens. But I still like fixing airplanes. Out of the blue, I get a call and they say, hey, you need to go to the federal building in Seattle on this date and time for your polygraph. Okay, right on. So I go there and I do the polygraph test. That was very intimidating. The person who did the test he had introduced himself and said that he was actually in the CIA and he was a polygrapher for them. Is that how you say it? Polygrapher?
Yep,
Polygrapher?
that's correct.
Okay. And that was a lengthy process going through there. And it was, you ask these questions and then, well, I don't think you're being honest on this one. And a lot of it was about drug use. And I had never used drugs. Still haven't used
Right.
drugs. Because I went from high school right into the military, right into fixing airplanes, and you're drug tested for all of that. So my thing was like, I've never done drugs. Like, well, we don't believe you. I don't know what to tell you. Like, I've never done drugs. So I go through the polygraph test, and then it's about 4 or 5 months later, my neighbors in my apartment complex, I come home one day from work, and my neighbors are like, hey, the FBI were here asking about you. Are you in some kind of trouble? And I'm like, no. I said, actually, I'm applying to be in the Secret Service. Like, oh, we told them that we don't, we've never even seen you. We have no idea who you are. I'm not in any kind of trouble. One day, I remember it was 4 o'clock in the morning because I worked the morning shift at BF Goodrich. So I always would get up early. And I was already up, and it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and my phone rang. And I'm thinking, well, there's nothing good about this. There's going to be no goodness about this phone call. So I answer it, and it's, hey, this is the United States Secret Service Uniform Division. We have academy starting in 2 weeks, and you've been selected to start the academy. We need a yes or no right now, whether you're going to be there. If you say no, we're moving to next on list. So I basically had to decide kind of right at that moment. And I said, yes, I'll be there. And they said, okay, we'll go ahead and mail you the address. Because again, this was the old days. This was 1999.
Right.
And they said, yeah, we'll go ahead and mail you the address where you're going to be and where you need to go and where you report for duty. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks. I'm like, great. So the whole process was about 2 years of a
Really,
process.
that long? That long?
Yeah. And even in training, they were still working on our top secret security clearance, which I didn't
Right.
know because our training is we do 2 weeks in Beltsville, Maryland, and then we go to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glen Cove, Georgia for like 18 or 20 weeks. Then we go back to Beltsville, Maryland for another 20 weeks. And it was in the very last part of our training, we showed up one day and one of the guys in the back of the room, they said, yeah, he's no longer eligible to be here because he didn't pass his background check. And like I thought it was all done, but even when we're in training, they're still doing our background check and checking on our stuff because we had to have a top secret security clearance because, well,
Right.
we have guns next to the president and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So you had your thing. So yeah, so it's a lengthy process to get into the Secret Service.
Wow, that is a long time. So when you took the polygraph test, and you mentioned it, you've never taken one before, right?
Correct.
And you were nervous, am I correct?
Oh, very.
And of course, the polygraph examiner or polygrapher, as you said, he was intimidating.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The minute he introduced himself and said, he also gave me a card and said, I'm in the CIA and I do polygraph examination for the CIA. That's intimidating. That's just
Right.
intimidating.
Right. And when you took the test, obviously he was trying to see if your results were or what your reactions were. However, you didn't do anything. Obviously, afterwards, you left knowing you didn't do anything. They obviously called you and you did well and you passed. What would you tell someone that's going through the process? They didn't do anything, they have nothing to worry about going and taking a polygraph test.
I think just being honest. I mean, just straight up be honest. I mean, because they kept asking, and you could tell like they would hit the same thing. There was a drug thing they kept hitting on, and there was something else, and I can't remember what it was. I think lying. Like, have you ever lied? And I said, well, yeah, I have lied. To like, or have you ever lied to an employer? I was like, yeah, I've lied to an employer. And like, well, be specific. I'm like, well, I was like, I called in sick to work when I really wasn't sick. And they're like, okay, that's not lying. We're talking about like a real lie.
And
Like,
I think
yeah,
and I think what they're trying to do with you, a major lie or integrity, is because you're going to be working with such high-powered individuals. They want to make sure that your integrity is through the roof in order to get that kind of serious job. And you mentioned it, a top secret clearance.
correct. Correct. So be honest with them. If they ask, if they say, "Have you ever lied?" Don't be like, "Oh, well, I've called in sick, and technically that's a lie, but I'm not going to say anything because it's not a big thing." When I said it, they just said, "Okay." Then when they asked me the polygraph questions, they were like, "Okay, have you ever lied to an employer, not including calling in sick,
Right.
that kind of stuff?" And I think there's things too about theft. Like, have you ever stolen from an employer? I'm like, yeah, like I've taken pens home, and like,
Sure.
well, and they're like, that's not theft. I'm like, well, technically it is. Like, you asked me if I, so I think you have to just be honest with them. And it seemed like they kind of walked me through because that's only the really big things I had is I take pens from work and I call in sick when I'm not sick. Like that's the worst I've really done.
I think everyone loves pens. I mean, that is a no-brainer. Everyone loves pens. Even when they come to my office, I have to say, "Can I have that pen back? Thank you very much." Because if I don't, I think these pens are walking out my door. But yeah, you're right. I think when people go to take these polygraph tests with federal agencies, law enforcement, firefighting, they want to know what your character is. And there's not one person that I know that has not taken something, a sticky notepad or whatever, from a place of employment. That's not what they're really majoring in looking into you. They're looking into, have you taken cash from the cash box? Have you
Exactly.
stolen from your coworker? Have you gone into the locker room and people, maybe you've gone into the refrigerator and maybe eaten a snack or whatever, but that's not what they're really looking for. They're looking for your integrity when they test you, and that's what I am when I test people, especially in the job that you were looking and applied for. So, and by the way, I forgot to say thank you for your service in the Air Force.
Thank you. Thank you.
You mentioned, Justin, briefly, and I think it's real important to also tell people this. When you went into law enforcement after leaving the federal law enforcement and you applied to Mesa, I think TV portrays law enforcement, and and I tell people it's the same with polygraphs. They portray it in a setting, but people get that entertainment thought in their head and they think that's the real deal. And when they see it, and especially when they come to me and they go, "Oh, well, I thought this is how it's supposed to be." And I think it's the same with law enforcement. I think they watch it and they think, "Oh, well, I'm going to sign up and I'm going to be a homicide detective right off the bat." And I tell people, "Nope, it's not going to be that way," because I was in a law enforcement uh, capacity, and I know it takes a long time to reach that pinnacle. And you said it, and I wanted you again to elaborate from the time you went from the academy, graduated, and then you started on the street, what it took to become a detective. And not every street officer, one, has aspirations to become a detective, and also other detectives have to see what you're like as a street officer to even kind of invite you into the division. So tell the listeners what it really takes to become one.
And that's a great point because most people do Hollywood law enforcement where they think like, oh, I'm a homicide detective, so you've always been a homicide detective. Everybody starts out as the same. You're a recruit, and then you go to the patrol, and then you can work up from there in your different specialties. And I always say the biggest thing is that's your learning point. There are things that you learn in patrol. So after the academy, everybody goes to patrol officer, uniformed officer. That's the police that we see every day in the marked cars. That's where you learn to talk to people. That's where you learn when people are lying to you. That's when you learn what's suspicious and what's not suspicious. It's that years of experience that really get you to being a detective. Because as a detective, you're basically doing the exact same thing as a patrol officer, just on a different level.
Right.
One of the other things that also in police work, it's all about your reputation. And every report you write, those reports go to detectives and detectives read those reports. So if there's an officer, if you have a desire to go to be a detective, you better write good reports because they all know your name. And even in Mesa, at that time, it was about 700 officers, sworn officers. Now it's about 1,200. But even back then, even at 700 officers, everybody knew your name. Like when you said my name, Bocock, there's not many Bococks in the world, and it's a unique name. But
Right.
Bocock, detectives knew, oh, I've read your report. You write good reports. You do a good job. So I would try to follow, because I saw I wanted to go detective, I would try to follow up on those things. So if I got a case like a burglary or a shoplift, even, or anything like that, if I had time in my day, wasn't handling calls for service or doing traffic control or things like that, I would go out and try to follow up on those cases and follow down some leads, go talk to people, try to get more information as I could to show that I want to do investigations. Just like if there are people who want to go into the drug world, they would go and hit drug areas and try to get drug arrests and try to get confidential informants and start working on that. So you kind of find what niche you want to be in and then go from there. Because everybody kind of has their own thing. Very few people go into police officer and they stay patrol for their entire career. First off, it's really hard. Patrol is a young man's game, especially in Arizona. It's 120 degrees. You're running and jumping and all that. After about 6 years, most people are pretty tired of it. So I'd say that's the big thing is you learn from everything that you do, from the simple traffic stop helps you talk to people and just communicate with people. And then the next thing is your reputation. Everything you do, everybody pays it. It's just like now. Anything you put online, that stays online. That's kind of your social reputation. You know what I mean? It's the same thing in the police department. Everybody knows who you are. And there's some people who have tried to be detectives and everybody knows they're just not very good. Like they don't
Right.
write good reports. And it sucks because they try and you have to tell them like, hey, maybe try working on reports, try doing a little bit of this, maybe go and do some of this. And sometimes they can overcome those and sometimes just telling them they can overcome those shortfalls and say, okay, I need to get better at this. Because not everybody is good at everything all at once. I certainly wasn't. I had some very good mentors that helped me through a lot of these things. And I volunteered for a lot and followed things. And that's my third thing, volunteer. I know everybody says, don't volunteer for anything, especially people who are in the military, but volunteer for stuff.
Right.
When I was a patrol officer and they like, hey, detectives need someone to help out searching. Oh, I'll do it. You know what I mean? Get my name out there so I can say, hey, introduce myself. Hi, Officer Bocock. What do you need help with? Hey, we need someone to go look through get in the trash can and dump and go through the trash can because I'm not going in there. Not a problem, sir. I got it. You know what I mean? It's kind of a junky job, but then hey, they're like, hey, this guy's willing to go through the ranks. Just like when I went to violent crimes, if homicide ever asked, because my goal was to go to homicide, if I was in aggravated assault and robbery or violent crimes and homicide needed help on something, oh, boom, I'll help them out. What do they need? Well, they need, again, they need someone to go through the trash cans because they're not doing it because they're homicide. They wear ties and a knife. They're not going through the trash can. Yeah, not a problem. I got some coveralls in my trunk. I'll go through the trash can for them. And then you get a name for them. And then they're like, hey, you helped us out before. You want to come help us out on a search warrant that we're doing tomorrow? Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to help you guys out. You know what I mean? So you kind of get a name so that when I applied to homicide, and also on top of all of that, you also have to take an actual written test for each
Right.
segment too. So from patrol officer to detective, you take a test on your knowledge of the crimes and all that, and your knowledge comes from education and experience. Arrest people for things. Look at the laws. If you have never taken an armed robbery case as a patrol officer, volunteer to take one. You may not know how to do it, but figure it out. Like go through it,
Right.
talk to people, and then you get experience in that. So same thing with homicide. You take a test, you do an interview, and they already kind of know you. We're like, hey, and then you also for homicide, you had to submit one of your reports as well. You pick what you think is your best report, and then they pick a report at random that you've written in the last like 2 years. So to see your report writing ability, because that's the other thing that Hollywood leaves out is that for every hour of actual police work, and you were in law enforcement, you know this,
That's right.
for every hour of actual field police work, you're spending 2, 3, 4 hours
That's right.
typing, sitting at your
Right.
desk, drinking coffee, and just typing away, and then reading, rewriting, proofreading, having your sergeant reading and being like, nope, do it again.
Right.
And
And I don't think people realize it is that report not only is going to serve as evidence, it's going to go to the prosecution, the defense is going to read it, the judge may look at it, it may go to the grand jury. So you better have every I, every T dotted correctly because they're going to be really scrutinizing it big time once you say, this is it, this is my final report. So, yeah, I get that.
I've always said that. I also taught classes to recruits and then also to new detectives. And I always say that Mesa, Arizona actually had a case that went all the way to the US Supreme Court. So I always say, you write a report, even as a patrol. It was a patrol situation where a guy wasn't giving up his hands and they charged him with resisting arrest. And it went all the way to the US Supreme Court, and they said that just by active or passively resisting is still resisting arrest. But basically, I was like, as a patrol officer, even as a patrol officer, you may write a report that someday, 5, 10 years down the road, a justice of the US Supreme Court is going to be reading. So when you write a report, write it as if the Supreme Court's going to read it because they may, and you don't want a bad report going to them.
That's true.
You don't want that reputation.
That's right. So now I'm going to get into you being a homicide detective. Now, I may get some slack from this, but I'm going to ask you, have you ever eaten dinner or a sandwich or a meal at a crime scene?
No, not in a crime scene.
I didn't say in, I said at. I didn't say in, I said
Okay, see, words matter. Okay, yeah, at a crime. Absolutely. In a crime scene, no, because you're gonna contaminate it.
of
But no,
course.
yes, I have absolutely been in bloody, just biological material everywhere. Your viewers can figure out what that is. I have left the crime scene and gone and gotten some pizza and a Gatorade and then gone right back in there.
Right.
It's one of those things. When I've had people there are some people in like law enforcement who don't like blood. And if that's your thing, don't go into homicide because unfortunately, homicides are bloody. Not just the crime scenes themselves, but we also go to the autopsies, and
Mhm.
those are also, you're
And they
seeing
and
body.
and they and they smell also.
Yes, the smells. Yeah, it smells and all that thing. And I've had scenes that are smelly, and it has gotten to me a little bit. Don't do what they do in the movies where
I
they put
know.
those.
Exactly.
But
And because people don't understand that. If you put Vicks or you put something that it opens up your nasal passages and then that smell just gets into your
and it gets
passages
stuck on that, and yeah,
and
yeah.
stays there. And when you leave the crime scene, it's all on you even more so. And you're going, oh my God, I put something up my nose. Doesn't work, just like in Hollywood. It doesn't work.
The
So,
one
yep,
thing
yep.
I did see that does work is I've only done it like once or twice on heavy decomposition cases, a gas mask. Like, we have gas
Yeah,
masks for like tear
yeah.
gas and things like that.
Mhm.
That does work. But it was very, very bad. We get a lot of heat in Arizona, and imagine being deceased in a home in 120 degrees for about 3, 4 weeks. It was really bad. So yeah, the gas mask actually worked. It actually
And what
works.
works also is if you borrow a firefighter's breathing apparatus, that works as well.
That
I,
would be
I
good.
I've done that too, so that does work. So I will tell my listeners that you are absolutely 100% a homicide detective if you've eaten at a crime scene. So there you go. So kudos to you. Let's talk about one of my favorite all-time movies, and it kind of leads into Homicide, which is Raising Arizona. And I'm sure everyone, if not, you haven't seen it, you got to look at it. But it's the one scene that's kind of funny, and it's poignant. The point where the owner of the furniture store, where he had his son kidnapped, and he's in his living room, and all the police and the FBI and the federal agents are inside his living room, and he tells them, he says, of all the places that my son's not here, you need to go look for him because everywhere there's microfibers and shit, and this is the only place that's not. What that meant, and it's funny, means that every crime scene or every crime that's committed, there's evidence that's left. And in today's society, especially today, I can't imagine that there's not any evidence that's left anywhere at a crime, especially with eyewitnesses, good eyewitnesses, obviously, cameras, and DNA. If they've committed a crime, they're going to be in CODIS. They're going to be somewhere and they're going to be found. You may not be found now, but you will absolutely be found somewhere down the road. And to me, this is what's so prevalent that I think is a detective that people don't understand is as a homicide detective, that's what we are there and detectives are there for. We're looking for just the smallest, minute piece of evidence or clue that's going to help solve this case. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And that's the transfer theory. And it's the theory that everywhere you go, you leave something of you behind. So if any place that you go in, you're dropping hair follicles, you're dropping skin follicles, you're leaving your fingerprints, you're leaving DNA. And they really have it the transfer theory that came out, and it mainly focused on DNA evidence and footprint evidence and shoe impressions and things like that. But even nowadays, everywhere that you go, we every single one of us carry a phone or a smartwatch, and that is connecting to things. So you go into a place, your phone might try to connect to somebody's Wi-Fi or somebody else's Bluetooth item. And these are all things that you can now use that law enforcement and homicide detectives or any detectives can use to put you there. So transfer theory no longer in today's society no longer goes with just witnesses and DNA evidence and fingerprint evidence. It goes with your electronical footprint. Everywhere you go, we are being tracked by our phones and our smart devices everywhere. And that helps law enforcement a lot.
Yeah, and you brought up something that's absolutely perfect is in reference to the Utah college murders. They tracked him and pinpointed his cell phone tracking, and that's how they actually found him location wise and where he was near the crime scene. And that's exactly why, because he left traces of where he was through his cell phone.
Yep,
So,
exactly.
yeah, everyone is going to get caught somehow, somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, the big moral is don't commit crimes. Like, don't
Exactly.
commit crimes because you're
I,
not going to get away with it. You're going to get caught.
I don't think there's a perfect crime out there or a perfect criminal. Matter of fact, even the jewelry heist in Paris,
Yeah.
at the Louvre, everyone thought, oh, I mean, of course, it was a inside job, obviously, but they got caught after a while. I mean, they did an excellent job, but they eventually got caught.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
I think that they're going to get caught. Well, I want to turn to a major headline, and you and I have talked off camera for a while, and we're on the kind of like the same page, but I want the listeners to hear it from you. And the major headline, obviously, is in reference to the Nancy Guthrie, what I call the abduction. And this occurred now, it's over 30 days since she's been missing and abducted. And it happened February 1st, 2026 in Tucson, Arizona. My opinion, and everyone has an opinion, like I say, everyone has a butthole, but everyone has one. But my professional opinion is that this was not a kidnapping, because there are certain parameters for kidnapping, and then this just did not fall in one. This to me felt like a burglary that went wrong, and he or how many individuals that were there, they just had to take the individual Nancy, and because either they were startled or whatever. But I want to hear from you, because you obviously have dealt with these kind of cases in Arizona. The vast area of Arizona and what happens in cases like this. And so if you'll just please elaborate more on what your professional opinion is on this case as well.
Yeah, and just like you said, everything I'm going to say is it's my opinion. I have no inside knowledge on the case at all. I don't know any of the investigators working on it. I just looked at the case from my own experiences because I have worked homicide cases that have been in the media, and then they did a press conference and the media makes my case into something that is absolutely completely not. Where I'm hearing something in the media talking about it, and I'm like, that's not what's happening at all. But that's kind of what they've conjured. Always keep in mind on these press conferences and when we hear all this stuff about these high profile cases, like the one down in Tucson in the Nancy Guthrie case, that press conference is coming from the sheriff. He's making the statements, not the detectives, not, the people actually working the cases. They're This is coming from him. So he's getting that information second or third hand usually. And I always say, like, the sheriff doesn't know what those detectives are doing on a daily basis, but they're asked, "Hey, what are you guys doing on the phones? We're working on the phones." He's just assuming that they're working on the phones. He doesn't know how they're doing it, but they're doing something with the phones. And I think that case, right from the very get-go, the sheriff made statements that she is abducted, which is true per verbiage, abducted.
Mhm.
And the media immediately turned that around into she was Hollywood kidnapped, that somebody showed up at her house, get on the ground, Nancy, you're kidnapped. And, put her in zip ties and a bag over her head and put her in a van and drive her to a secure location. That's kind of what they've spun off on because I heard the sheriff say that. And I remember saying to myself, he better watch his words because he's
Right.
making assumptions that the media is going to run with, and they did. And I think the media ran with that, and it instantly turned into now this is a kidnapping. Where again, I don't have the inside knowledge, but a majority of kidnappings like that, high profile kidnappings, the goal is to get money.
Right.
So it's going to be a kidnapping, and almost immediately it's going to be something of do X, and you'll get that person back.
That's right.
Where here, there was none of that. And I've seen that as a patrol officer, as a detective. I've seen lots of cases where it doesn't happen a lot, but it does, where you do have a missing person and it looks like a burglary may have occurred, or even a sex assault occurred and that person's missing. And then you find them later on and you find out that, okay, the burglary or the crime occurred, they were taken from the scene and they call those burglaries gone wrong or something along those lines. For whatever reason, the suspects felt that they had to remove them. Either they were going to be identified, there was witnesses, whatever, and they take them and they put them somewhere. Another thing that's unfortunate about Arizona is we have a lot of open space. Anybody who's ever been to Arizona or flown over Arizona or driven through Arizona, we have a lot of open space, a lot of hiking areas. And we have a lot of cases where we'll have a missing person and hiking season happens, which right around now is like the beginning of hiking season. It's starting to get warm. It's starting to get hot. People are starting to come out here to visit because it's so cold back east. So they come here to visit where it's quasi warm. And as they go on these hiking trails, they find deceased people that have been placed into the wilderness. And we start solving the missing cases because we get them, we do DNA, we can track people by DNA and teeth impressions, medical things in their bodies if they've had knee replacements or things like that. And we start identifying missing people and that we thought were missing. And now we're like, oh, and now they're homicides. So that unfortunately is a possibility in the Guthrie case is that something happened and there was some sort of crime, burglary, occurred. For whatever reason, they felt the need to take her out of there. And she was bleeding because her blood was on the outside. So we know that. So they took her out there and then I don't know if they're holding her, but there is a possibility that they put her in on a hiking trail off of a road. There's a lot of dirt roads. There's mine shafts everywhere. There's a lot of open space in Arizona, especially in Tucson. Tucson's a pretty rural area. And unfortunately, that could be a possibility. Now, a good thing is once we find like in cases I've worked, when we find the individuals, then we get a plethora of evidence because then
Right.
we start getting DNA, fingerprints. You can't put duct tape on something without getting your own hairs or your own skin on there. And if you use duct tape, I don't want to give away any ideas, but here's the thing, just don't commit
Yeah.
crimes. If you
Right.
use duct tape, you're getting caught because duct tape sticks to everything. So once we find the individual and we're like, oh, they're not a missing person, they're a homicide victim.
Right.
Boom, we're getting a DNA profile of somebody. And it may not be the murderer, but then we get somebody who's like, oh, I just drove him there. Well, it's felony murder in Arizona, so you got some explaining to do. And then
Right.
the dominoes start going from there. They're like, well, but this guy gave me the person, and then, "Oh, I didn't do it, but check them because
Right.
they does." And then we solve the crime from there. So that is a positive. is that there's evidence galore that's gonna help us out there, but just getting to that point and the waiting is the hard part and the sadness of it. And that's, I mean, it's just a really sad story.
Right. And like I said, and I've said this, if and when, they find Miss Guthrie, if they find anything under her fingernails, if she did struggle with the perpetrator, they're going to find his or DNA, or if she, scratched something in the car carpet or the dirt or whatever, or clothing off that person's body. That's like you said, they're going to find something. And you hit it on the nose. I was a former hostage negotiator. And so if it was a kidnapping, the ultimate goal of the kidnapper is to keep the individual alive because you have something that you want and it's in exchange. You give me this, I'll give you this. And this was not the case. You had copycat from the TV, stations, and I think the FBI did, they closed that down pretty quickly because you didn't hear anything else after, I think that. And I think what I'm seeing now, not just this case, but is the news wants something so badly that the law enforcement agencies feel they have to hurry up and give them something before they even have anything. And I think that's what happens, because I know when I was on, and probably when you were on, we didn't have all these press conferences. We didn't give them what they wanted or what they thought they needed. It was real journalism. They either had to find it themselves or, whatever. But we didn't have all these press conferences. And, the investigators, like you said, they did their work. And it wasn't third, fourth hand information that came out. And it was all over the place. And that's why I think you don't see the FBI giving out press conferences. They're there behind the sheriffs or behind the chiefs in support because they don't like to talk and they don't like to tell their strategies because that's not what they do. They do their investigations, they get the evidence, and then they want to go and they want to make the apprehension. Then afterwards, then you see the press conferences with all the agencies behind them and saying, we did a great job. This is, the task force that we did, not ahead of time. It's crazy to me.
It is. And I don't fault them too much because and I've seen it in my cases, is that, the staff members of the police department feel that, well, if we just explain to the public, they'll understand. The thing is, they never understand. No matter how much you give them, they want more. Because you could tell them we're doing this, and they'll say, "What about phones? What about doing polygraphs on all the family members? What about doing this? What about a burglary that happened three months ago in the same area? I talked to a witness that said this." They're never going to listen to you and go, "Oh, okay, yeah, that totally makes sense. We're good with that." So you're constantly feeding the media system that's never going to be happy with what you're saying, because there's always going to be something that's not done or that you can't answer because you can't. Either you don't know, or if you say it, it's going to hurt the case and possibly hurt like witnesses and
Right.
things like that. And I've seen that in a lot of cases. And I think that's kind of what happened here. And I think so remember the videos that the still images that came out that Google ended up getting off of the Nest camera?
Mhm.
That was a whole confusing thing too, because they came out and they go, "This is the guy." But then come to find out later that Google was like, "Well, we can't tell you what was on January 31st or February 1st. We think it
Right.
might have been January 11th, maybe." Then they came out later and said, "We can't tell you a date on that at all. So we
Right.
don't know when this was." And now it looks like you're lying, right? So
Mhm.
now the media is like, "Well, the sheriff was lying to us." The sheriff wasn't lying. He just didn't know because he was told, because somebody at Google said, "Yeah, here's an image. We got an image." And somebody might have known that, or maybe they didn't know it and they're just now figuring it out because it sounds like they kind of used some weird technologies to get it anyway.
Right.
They may not have known, but it kind of, even though there is no malice in there, it does make you look bad to the public, because then the media starts, and not just the media, but society and the public start going, looks like you might have been lying to us. Well, we're not lying. We just didn't know. And that's what you were saying. People seem so quick to be the first to get the information out that they're not waiting for the accurate information to come out.
Right. And that's what it is. It's just so quick to throw it out when I would say back then,
let's do our job before anything comes out. And here's the thing: only the suspect and the investigators know what's going on. When you start throwing it all out there, now you have, with conspiracy theories, and then the suspects out there going, well, this is great, that's not what happened, but yeah, I'll run with it. And then now it's even harder if the suspect does get caught. Well, yeah, I know what happened because I saw it on TV. But now you have to really figure out, is he the real suspect, or did he learn this from TV himself or herself? It gets really, really convoluted and difficult for the investigator to do their job.
It does. And then also you start getting a huge amount of tips. And I've had cases like that where we went to the media and we just start getting inundated with tips. But then we get really good ones and that's why you're kind of apprehensive to go to them. Because I had a case where I was waiting for DNA and forensics, nothing was coming back, went to the media, I got a bunch of tips. As those tips were coming in, I actually had a DNA hit. And it was from another state, so it took a little bit longer to get. And I'm like, oh, this is actually good information. But now, as an investigator, I still have to look, and it ultimately ended up being that person that I got the DNA hit from a different state. But as an investigator, I had to look into all the anonymous tips that I got, because if I didn't, then that's gonna come up in court, where I'm gonna be on the stand, and the defense attorney is gonna go, "Did you get 100 tips?" Yes. Here's tip number one. That sounds pretty credible. Did you ever look into it? No. Oh,
Right.
here's tip number two. And then all you got to do is have a jury go, well, this guy didn't do anything. He
Oh,
didn't look
sure.
into, he got a DNA hit and a fingerprint, and he was like, oh, that's the guy, and never even looked into him. So that's why you have to be careful, because that does, like you said, convolute your case, where you have all of this investigation to basically prove they didn't do it. Just so when it goes to court, you don't look like an idiot on the stand of being like, nope, I didn't look at any of it. I got a fingerprint hit and I put him in jail, and that was it.
Well, well, that leads to me to the black glove. They all focused on that one black glove because he
Oh,
was wearing the surgical gloves, or what
yeah.
appeared to be surgical. It could have been just regular leather gloves from, winter leather gloves from Walmart, whatever. But they focused on those black gloves. When you worked these cases in the desert, how much trash would be thrown along the highways or along, tumbleweeds and stuff would blow around? How much?
Oh, a lot. And we have a lot of areas there that are in the middle of nowhere, but people go out there to go shooting. So, like, we have shooting ranges in Arizona, like indoor ones, but a lot of people will just go outside and just shoot. So there'll be bottles everywhere, and then there'll be, bullet casings everywhere, and there's trash everywhere. And I've had recovered deceased bodies at places where people do gunshots or where people go
Oh,
shooting.
wow.
So we're taking all those, and they're deceased from a gunshot. So now
Uh,
we're taking all these bullets around them and all these beer bottles and broken cans and shot up cans. We don't know but the thing is, we don't know what we don't know. Were they killed there during a shooting thing, or were they just brought out there because this person knew where that area was because they go shooting out there themselves? You know what I mean? But you
okay.
can't just discredit it. So yeah, there is trash everywhere. Like, just imagine, drive down the freeway, no matter what state you live in, drive down the freeway and just look at the shoulders every now and again. There is trash everywhere. And you wouldn't think it, but gloves, hats, clothing, you name it, and it's out there. And that's the same thing in the desert type areas. So you don't know what's evidence and what's not evidence. And in the Guthrie case, remember, they were searching, and in like a mile area, they found blue gloves
Right,
that they think
right,
maybe belong to law enforcement, which maybe they did. Maybe they just,
right,
took the gloves off and threw them on the road. Really shouldn't do that. But it
right,
happened, and now you got to pull those and try to figure out whose DNA it is. And yeah, it can
right.
convolute things.
Right, and not only that, you have to, which if they you have to get the elimination prints, So if you don't even get that, now it's really blown off the charts going, okay, we got prints, but it's not in the system. Who could it be?
Yeah.
So yeah, I know, I get it. It's a tough case. I do hope they solve it, but I think it hurt when it was immediately thrown out into the media on cases like this.
Yeah, and they will ultimately solve it. I think one of the saddest things to me was the people that took advantage of the situation and did that whole ransom thing. And again, it may have been legitimate, but if they are found that to do this ransom thing, and they were not involved in it and they were just trying to get money. I just think that is, I think that they should really throw the book at those people, because that they really slowed the investigation down. They used a lot of resources that could have been used in other things, and that was just a horrible thing to do. Because when I saw that, and there was multiple ransom people, and then a guy in California got arrested for kind of trying to do the
Right.
same thing, trying to extort money out of him, I was like, that is absolutely horrific, and I think that the book really should be thrown at them. I really do.
Yeah, I agree. There's shitty people out there. You know that? There really are. There really are. Well, I want to talk about your book. You are a published author. Many people in life say, you know what? I want to write a book. Many people say that's on my bucket list, but they never get around to doing it. And a lot of people don't either have the time, they don't have the patience, or they just don't do it at all. You did it. And I want you to tell the audience, once again, what the book is called, what it's about, and at the end, I want you to tell the audience how they can find it, how they can purchase it, and then I'll tell the audience and listeners something special that you gave me to give to them. Go ahead.
Perfect. So yeah, so I wrote a book. It's called On Call: Case Files from a Career in Homicide. Boom. There you go. And I always had an idea. So my last couple years, like I said, I always knew I was going to do 20 years, and then I had a lot of other jobs I wanted to do. I've always said I don't do sitting really well, and there's a lot of other things I wanted to do in life. So my last couple years, it kind of hit me. It was 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was sitting at a crime scene, and we're all like, we're tired and like, oh, this sucks. But I'm like, you know what? How many people would love to be here to see the things that we do, because not many people get to do this, especially true crime fans. And my wife watches a lot of true crime TV, and almost all of it is narrated or told. The cases are narrated or told by the prosecutor who prosecuted the case, or the sergeant or lieutenant who was in charge of the case. Very rarely does it come from the actual detective that did the work. And they always kind of leave things out, because they always say, okay, Susie was murdered, and then we knocked on John's door and we got him in handcuffs. And I'm like, okay, they missed something. They went to A to Z. Like, there was a lot of stuff in the middle there that they're not telling us about. So I kind of wanted to fill in those gaps. And then when I retired, so I'd always kind of been milling the idea around in my head. And when I retired and I was working on the criminal justice textbooks, I saw kind of the gap between academia and actual experience practicality of working law enforcement. Because there's things that, like, the law says that you will do, like, you need these 9 things to make this happen. Well, those 9 things are never perfect in the real world. So I would give it scenarios of like, oh no, this is how we would handle that in real world. And professors would go, well, that's really not by the book. I'm like, well, he's in prison for 25 years and it's gone through the entire appellate process. You know what I mean? So
Right.
textbook and reality are 2 different things. So I kind of wanted to bring those 2 items together. And then the last thing, so many times I hear on the media, people say terms and terminology that they just don't understand. So I brought together 13 cases that I worked as a homicide detective, and I do what they call a case study, which is basically break the cases down. And I do them from when I'm called out, that's the on-call part, all the
Right.
way until the prosecution. So
Wow.
from I'm called at home, and they all start at, in 2013 at 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call. And this is initially what we were told. There's a dead body in the street. That's all we knew. And then we show up, and then I break the cases down as I learned about them, which isn't always the most logical way about it, which makes it kind of fun, because you're
Right.
kind of seeing how a complex homicide investigation is solved when it's not perfect like in the movies,
Mhm.
or
That's right.
perfect like in the true crime series. So then I talk about like the briefing, and I talk about the individual roles. It's not just for the true crime enthusiast. It's also for somebody who's in law enforcement that may want to be a detective, but doesn't
Mhm.
have a lot of experience in it. There's no schooling. There's no homicide school. There's no
Right.
robbery school.
Right.
You learn through experience. It's on the job training. You learn through doing them. By, hey, there's a robbery. Hey, I'll take it. What do I do? And then the senior person will say, hey, this is what I've done. But it changes every time. Sometimes you have to think outside of the box. So this is also for people who are interested in that. So I go over some items that, like I talk about search warrants and physical characteristic search warrants and the basic needs of them. I talk about terminology of firearms. Like what's a projectile? What is a casing? How are those compared? I explain how the forensic people will explain those, and not the science behind it, but how what they tell us we can use to solve crimes. Like every projectile will leave different grooves in the actual bullet itself. That's called the projectile, and those are called lands and grooves. And I explain how those different things they can narrow down to certain guns and tell us. And I have a specific case where they gave us a list of the the forensic scientist said these are 13 guns that this bullet could come from. But with my years of experience, I'm telling you right now, it's going to be this one.
Right.
And guess what? It was that one when we found it. And it was out of pure happen chance that we found that. Somebody called me again, 3 o'clock in the morning, say, hey, I just stopped a guy and he's got this type of gun. And you got to read the book to get the rest of that story. But so I go over, so in each one of the cases, I go over a different aspect of the law enforcement and also each twist that was in there. I did some things that didn't work out. Some people call them failures. I say I tried something and it didn't work out, right? I didn't fail to make a light bulb. I figured out a way not to make a light bulb. So I kind of go through examples of this is something that I tried that absolutely did not work. It didn't hurt the case. We didn't lose the case. It just didn't work. And I was like, well, I want people to know about that so that if you ever are thinking about doing that, just maybe look at my example and maybe say, hey, maybe I'll do it, but keep in mind it may not work. But also times where I did things that were kind of out of the box and it absolutely worked. And you're like, oh, that worked. So homicides they're not a checkbox type thing. Each one is individual and you have to treat it as such. Each circumstance is different. And each one of the cases goes through there. And we talk about domestic violence murders and robbery murders, drug related murders. I also have in there a cold case that I solved. As a homicide detective, you take over the cases of the detective that worked before you. So when I came into the unit, I automatically inherited my first day in the unit, I inherited 13 cold cases. So I started my first year in the homicide unit. I started with my oldest one, and it was a 1980. Actually, happened on Super Bowl Sunday in 1980. It was a sexual assault and murder of a 14-year-old girl. And I worked it for about a year and a half, 2 years. And it was already pretty much solved, but we had to do a lot of work to get it to prosecution. And I ended up working that case. And so I talk about how to work cold case investigations where evidence isn't properly secured because in 1980, they didn't know what DNA was. So they didn't think about trying to protect it. 1980, a lot of my witnesses had already passed away. So we had to deal with all those kind of things. So I talk about all those shortfalls and how you can kind of overcome them. I also talk, one year I had 3 self-defense murders where they were murders that were deemed self-defense, where it was the weirdest thing. It's like I got 3 in a row that were self-defense. I actually started going to my partner and being like, hey, am I doing something wrong here? Like, who gets 3 in a row? Like, am I taking their side? Like, it is like, no, it's just weird. So I talk about kind of the self-defense and how, because as an officer or a detective, we don't determine what self-defense is. We simply collect the facts and it goes to a lawyer. It goes to the county attorney's office and lawyers will decide whether it's justified or not. So we treat it as a regular homicide, but they sounded weird. Every one of the situations you were like, that didn't happen. Like, there's no way. Like the one, I won't give too much away, but it's basically, I was partying with my friend. We ended up in the pool and then I shot him in the head in self-defense. And you're like, that's it. Like, that's it. And I want a lawyer. Like, okay, that sounds not right. Right. Like most people are like, okay, something is not right with that. Well, there's a whole investigation and all kinds of other stuff ends up coming up, and you're like, holy cow. Like you have to prove or disprove everything. So we go over that. So that's what I do in the 13 cases is I kind of go over it to give the reader a more of a idea of what goes into an investigation. Also, I focus on bias, on how my bias could sometimes lead to certain things, or even other people's biases, like witness biases, can lead to certain statements where, witnesses will see if a murder happens and you come to them and say, hey, a murder happened last night. Do you have any information that might help me? Oh, you know what? My neighbors are shady. They probably did it. Okay, why? Well, they're shady because, they have constant traffic in and out all the time. They don't like me. I don't like them. They're probably in on it. And then, more I think about it, I think I saw their car leaving at 2 o'clock in the morning. So then you have to look, is there a bias with that witness? And you have to look into it and all that, but you have to start considering that. And I also look at the group think mentality where you have a lot of people who will come together and say, like, a murder will happen or a violent crime will happen. And the group will get together and go, oh, it's in this area. It's got to be this guy. We all heard it in the Hollywood movies. Oh, he's good for it. This guy's
Sure.
good for this. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Evidence solves crime,
That's right.
not think it's him. So I focus on that because as society, we don't do that. Society, we kind of are like, a crime happened here. I believe this is what I believe because I have Twitter. Therefore, I know what's going on. Like the Guthrie case. Everybody has an opinion on the Guthrie case because everybody watches the news and everybody has Twitter.
Correct.
But the reality is, we don't know what's going on because we don't have access to the evidence. So they're still collecting evidence and trying to figure out what's happening in there. So I kind of focus on those and I show how bias and groupthink can affect an investigation so that the investigator who's looking to be a a detective or a professional investigator can use that as a guide. And also the true crime enthusiast can use that as a guide too, to also not fall into the groupthink where all of the media is saying, oh, this is a kidnapping, and go, oh, it's a kidnapping. Do your own research. We all have the internet. Do your own
Right.
research, look into it, and then say, okay, maybe it's not an abduction, definitely, because she was removed, but we don't know if she was kidnapped for money. You have to kind of keep an open mind. And that's kind of my thing. I want people to read it and see what goes into an investigation and be curious for themselves so they can really look at these investigations and then say, and not be critical of them, but just be curious. Like, okay, they're not telling us everything because they can't, but let's think about this. And I think it makes the law enforcement or the watching a case unfold on TV more exciting because you have a little bit of an inside knowledge as to how they actually do unfold. So that's what I kind of portrayed in On Call.
I think it's great, and I think it's funny because I know, and not the book is funny, but I think you and me and other investigators or prior or retired watching Hollywood, we sit back and we laugh at how they do things, and they go, "Oh my gosh, that's not how it works. That's not true." And I'm sure in your book, you said it from A to Z, which is awesome because you probably in your book wrote about canvassing,
Yes. Yep.
and that's important. People has a tedious, boring, but you'd be surprised. Canvassing can solve a murder or any crime if you just knock on the right door and talk to the right witness. And you also mentioned it. Everyone has biases and opinions, and what's also bad, and we have, and it's the truth, and I've proven it through my polygraphs, is there's a lot of false incarcerated people by false witnesses
Absolutely.
and false testimony. And you have to collect everything, just have everything in that package when you give it to the prosecutor, because your name is in that report. Your name is stamped. And when you go in front of the jury and you testify, boy, what's the defense job? To discredit you from day one and destroy your credibility. And that's
Yeah.
really, that's how they win cases. It's not about we got the loaded gun or we found the knife or whatever. It's to discredit how you got that gun and how you collected it or how you got that statement. Is to destroy your credibility. And that's what they do to investigators in reference to the crime.
Exactly. And actually talk about that in a couple of cases where, because I go through the whole process of the court preparation as well, all the way through jury selection to testifying, and how it is the defense's job. And I don't fault them because that's their job. I mean,
Right.
that's our legal system is set up that way. If we do something wrong or we are biased, or if a witness is biased, it's their job to point it out. It's my job as a professional investigator to also counteract that. And just like you were saying with witnesses, I always say, if your case rests on a witness, you don't have a case, especially nowadays. Juries don't want to see witnesses. Juries want to see technology. They want to see videos. They want to see phones. They want to see DNA. They want to see fingerprints. And science isn't always biased. It can be biased, but it's not always biased. But yeah, you really have to be careful about people, especially it was more and more towards the latter part of my career where you really had you could see the bias on people where even if somebody was guilty, or if they witnessed somebody do a crime, they would be like, nah, I didn't see it. I have you in video watching the guy.
Right.
Nope. I didn't see anything. Okay. And just be honest. Is it just that you don't like the police? Yeah, I just don't like the police. Okay, cool. That's cool because it's going to come out. I mean, you're either going
Right.
to tell me now or you're going to, or someone's going to ask you on the stand. And just tell me now and be honest. If you don't like me, I get it. I'm totally cool with that. And usually, if you have that mentality, people are like, yeah, I just don't like the police. I'm not going to help you. Great. Thanks for letting me know now. You know what I mean? Because better than telling me some BS story and then you end up on the stand and it's going to make you look bad anyway. So exactly what you were saying is that's the defense's job, is to discredit as much as they possibly can, or make it, you not even discredit, but even just put a little bit of doubt into it. Like,
Correct. Correct.
like, okay, we got DNA, but was it strong DNA? Well, it wasn't that strong. We had to amplify it. So, I mean, it was like kind of DNA. Well, kind of DNA is still DNA, but they got to throw that in there just in case a juror goes, well, they got kind of DNA, which isn't a thing. But no, you're absolutely right. And as professional investigators and true crime enthusiasts, we have to consider that at all times. That there's
Right.
that bias. We all have a bias, and it's just a matter of how you imply that bias that we have to really be careful of.
And you hit it on I love the word that you use. I use it all the time, all the time. You said the legal system. It's a legal system, not justice, because a lot of times justice is not met and not served. And I always say we have a legal system. And it's sad because there's a lot of times innocent people are not given the right justice, and the same with the guilty. But they follow the legal parameters, and that's where individuals that are in law enforcement, I think, that are so passionate, we are really dejected and upset when we put all this nice folder together and then we lose. We have to step back sometimes and say, you know what? I gave it to you. Now that was your job to do. I did my job, but sometimes we wear that entire case on our sleeve, and it really, really upsets us.
Absolutely. And that happened a lot in the beginning of my, like right before I went to Homicide and then in the beginning of my Homicide career. And I really learned and I talk about this in the book too, about how I progressed, where I, I say justice isn't for me. Justice is for the victims. My job is to do the best investigation that I possibly can. And there's examples of cases where the legal system didn't provide the justice that I thought was appropriate, but that's not for me to say, and I can't take it personally. And and also I learned from that. I learned from that where it's like, you know what? Maybe if I try a little harder, maybe if I get a little bit more information, maybe if I get a little bit more background information or make a stronger case. What if I take a couple of extra weeks and just get a few more witnesses, go canvas again. Let me hit the streets again and see if I can find one or two more people just to add to that pile of, because there's always, this is the evidence that we have. But if you start stacking more and more and more evidence on there, then the legal system starts getting harder and harder for them to say, well, let's be lenient because we have all of this evidence on there. So I kind of talk about that as a progression in myself as well, where you can't take it personally. You really can't take it personally. It's hard, but you
It is.
can't. As a professional investigator, you have to remember my job is to provide the facts to the case and do the best that I can. And if it's not the outcome that I like, I would always self-reflect and say, how can I do better? What can I do differently to try to affect the outcome? Sometimes it's not going to happen. I have a case that I actually talked about in the book where the jury literally did something. Oh, I won't give too much away, but
Right.
what to say? There's a jury situation that everybody who reads it goes, I can't believe that happened. And I'm like,
Right.
you're telling me? I can't believe that happened. So yeah,
Right.
you have stuff like that, and you learn from it. You learn from it, and you got to just do the best that you can to try to counteract it or not let it happen. But yeah, the legal system is a legal system, and lawyers and judges are going to do what lawyers and judges do,
Right.
and we don't. I'm one piece of the pie.
And I think that's where I do something different in my profession now, where I give people that couldn't get closure in that system, I give them closure now, where there are certain things they couldn't say or prove. They come to me, they take the polygraph test, and I prove that they were 100% open, honest, and they told the truth. I give them what they needed. They feel so much better. They get their integrity back. They get their closure. They prove their innocence in the form of a polygraph, and they are able to move on. And it's just overwhelming to them where they didn't get what they wanted to in, let's say, a court of law or some other legal parameter. And I do that for them. So, like I said, and I tell them in my office, there's not a justice, it's a legal system. And that's where we are now and probably forever because of what's happening.
And when I taught my classes to recruits and new detectives and things like that, I always say, I will point out the flaws of our legal system. It's not perfect, but it's still the best system that's out there. Like, you can say whatever you want. It's
Oh,
still
yeah.
the best system that's on this planet as of this moment. It's still the best system that's out there, guaranteed. It ain't
Oh,
perfect in any way,
it's
but it is
it's
a
the
lot
in the
better.
country. It's the best in the entire world. Other places
Absolutely.
don't even, other places don't even have what we have. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Justin, I can't tell you, I can, but it's just how great it's been that you've been a wonderful guest on this show. The experience, the insight as a homicide detective, and what you've shared with the listeners is resonating with a lot of true crime listeners, people that are wanting to get into the field that you've spoken about today. And I'm sure the book is definitely going to be on someone's top list to go and purchase. Please tell them how they can go and find your book and purchase it.
Well, perfect. You can find it on Amazon and just look up On Call Justin Bocock, and it'll pull up on there. You can also go to geniusbookpublishing.com. It's for sale on there. And also my website, justinbocock.com. And there's links on there that will send you right to Amazon or Genius Book Publishing, where you can pick up a copy of the book. I am currently working on the audiobook version right now. I'm reading it into the audiobook, and it is also on Kindle as well.
Awesome. Show the listeners the book one more time and hold it up steady so they can see it. Awesome. Awesome. And I will put a link, obviously, on this show on how they can get it and your website and everything. Okay. But before
Thank you
we
very much.
close out, you're so welcome. But before we close out, I want to tell my listeners that Justin has been gracious and has signed an autographed book for a very lucky listener. But in order to get it, this is what you must do. One, hopefully, and you must have listened to this entire episode. That's number one. Number two, you have to write back to me and you have to type in the title Arizona Homicide Detective 2026, and you have to share an insight or a moment from the podcast that really stood out to you and that you truly enjoyed and that you've taken away and you learned something from, because best detectives always pay attention to detail. Ladies and gentlemen, I am thrilled that you listened today on Inside the Polygraph, and I am thankful, Justin, that you took your busy time out to be on our show. And again, I am very grateful and thankful to you.
David, thank you very much for having me. I loved our conversation. It was a lot of fun. I really
I
appreciate it.
would. You're so welcome, and I wish you the very best in success in your book and in your teaching and in another 20 more years of whatever else you want to do, because you've done the military, federal law enforcement, regular law enforcement. So whoever knows what else is best for you, I wish you the best.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate that.
I hope everyone enjoyed today's episode. It was a great guest, Justin Bocock, who has extremely a lot of experience as a detective, working as a federal law enforcement agency, and who's a published author. So those who are interested in becoming a detective someday, or in the federal law enforcement field, you heard a lot, and I hope you got a lot out of it. Make sure you go on and reach out and buy that book of his, and you'll get even more information. I am really grateful to those that are listening and continuing to follow me, and you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you.